You're listening to the Surgeons of Horror podcast, Friday the 13th edition. Welcome to the first instalment of the special Surgeons of Horror podcast, Friday the 13th edition. Our purpose is to look into the horror films, dissecting them one screen legend, or in this case, film franchise at a time. Our first horror franchise discussions will centre on the Friday the 13th franchise, kicking off with the first movie, Friday the 13th, the one that started it all. From the vision of Sean Cunningham, I've carefully selected my crew of horror aficionados who will form the surgical team each episode, so let me introduce you. First up is yours truly, Paul Farrell, lead surgeon and host for the series of the podcast. I'm a self-confessed horror freak who grew up drawn to the dark work of the silver screen and threw myself into the arena absorbing as much of the genre as possible with relish and glee. Joining me each of the Friday the 13th episodes will be our head nurse turned surgical technician, Miles Davies. If there is anyone that you can rely on at the operating table, it's Miles. You need to have someone with an arsenal of knowledge at the ready when performing any operation, and Miles' sense of horror and his innate ability to draw on any subject to bring on the goods in order to make sure the surgical procedure is successful is paramount, even more so when it comes to the Friday movies. So that's our team. So without further ado, welcome aboard, Miles.
Hello.
Let's dissect the movie, buddy. Friday the 13th.
I love this film.
Yeah, you were saying just before we were before the pre-roll record, just for the sake of recapturing it, about how your sister was a huge horror slasher fan.
Yeah. Well, essentially, when VHS recorders came out in the early '80s, that we used to go down to the local video store on a Saturday night and go and rent a movie. And usually it was a horror film and a family film. For some reason, our parents didn't really mind whether we watched the good old slasher horror film because we knew it wasn't real. So we'd just go straight to the horror section and pick out the slasher of the week. And first one she ever picked out was Friday the 13th, which I think I watched about 4 times in 24 hours and just continued hiring it out. I think I've seen it over 100 times, more than any other horror film that I've ever seen, actually.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a favourite of mine, a big influence. I've just finished writing a horror film myself, and I'm putting that together at the moment to try and make that this year, and it's been a massive influence on that particular film. So it's good to discuss it.
Absolutely. It's interesting as well because it's interesting for me to hear how you entered this film and how it became how it was thrown on your radar, because I don't honestly remember when I first watched it, and that's no disrespect to the film, because there's so many elements within this movie that seems to be embedded in my psyche, or whether I knew about certain elements of it before I watched the film or not. I honestly can't tell you. But I mean, there's some great moments in it, and we'll get into that in due course.
I think it's been copied so many times.
That's the thing, isn't it? Yeah.
The first of its kind.
Yeah.
And it's been emulated and copied, and just it's become film language almost. That just sound alone is featured in records, in like songs, and I think I heard it in a song the other day. I can't remember who it was. Somebody put it in a mix of this song on Triple J, and I was like, holy hell, everywhere. So everybody's seen it. I don't know a single person who hasn't seen it.
No, that's right. Yeah. That's right. Well, look, part of what we want to achieve with this, as I said, is to look at all the Friday the 13th movies one by one and have a little chat around it and how the franchise has developed and grown since this very first one. But we're here to talk about its infancy, its birth, and that's the first of the films, as I mentioned, directed by Sean Cunningham. So let's for those that aren't familiar with our podcast discussions, what we tend to do is basically talk through the narrative of the film, and we'll kind of goof around, talk around it, as we go through it, and then we kind of get into the nitty gritty of the key players or directors or Harry Manfredini's kind of role in this instance with the score, things like that, just to kind of have a bit of a natter around it really, and spark that conversation. So let's get into it. The journey itself of the film. It opens at a holiday camp called Camp Crystal Lake. We're told that the year is 1958, and there are like these counsellors singing by a log fire. There is this POV shot as someone looks around the girls' dorm, and then we see two of the counsellor kids walk off to get some boom chicka wow wow action in what looks like a stable or a barn of some kind. As they get down to business, the predator sneaks up on them. They attempt to cover themselves up and deny any foul play, when the boy is then suddenly stabbed in the stomach. Our first kill. The girl stumbles and crashes her way around in an attempt to escape, but is cornered. We end the scene on a crash zoom on her into a still and open credits. This is our impact. So it's what was good about this, I guess, was it's as you say, something that's been copied since. Is this idea of taking the killer and seeing it from the POV of that killer, and we're not at this stage aware of who that person is.
Yeah, exactly.
And already from the get-go, we've had 2 kills. Any conversation you want to say about of what you remember about that early moment?
I mean, obviously it's incredibly shocking to see that first off, and then you skip the titles and stuff, which is really interesting. And you can kind of see how many times that's been done since. It's the Psycho moment almost.
Yes.
And Scream did it as well. Like they had the first kill pre-title sequence.
Yes.
Title stab, and so
That's right.
it's definitely a good setup. You're in for a ride now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So then we're taken to present day, or what was present day then, and we follow a backpacker called Annie, and she enters the local town. She's looking for Camp Crystal Lake. She enters the local cafe, and she gets that whole kind of wild-eyed stare from the locals of like this, interjector coming into the local village. One of them though does offer to give her a lift halfway to the camp. And on the way to the ute or truck or whatever it is, they're greeted by the infamous Ralph, the local village nutjob, who professes doom and the death curse that hangs over Crystal Lake. What a great character this Ralph is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can see that even in Cabin Fever, they've knocked off this kind of device as well.
That's true,
they have the crazy cat kung fu kid.
Yeah.
And was it Deliverance as well? So it's got that sort of. They're ticking all the boxes here.
That's right.
So, you got to have a local nut.
That's it. Got to have a local nut. So this local, Ralph character, he's warning them about not to get involved in the doomed project. And we then cut to where we then meet 3 other young kids who are driving on the way to Crystal Lake. There's Ned, Marcy, and Jack, who is played by Kevin Bacon. As I said, they're on the way.
That guy somewhere before.
yeah, that's right. Familiar face.
6 degrees of Jason Voorhees.
They're on their way to the lake, and we also meet the owner in another scene, Steve Christie, who is he's introduced when he's trying to uproot a tree, and there's another helper, Alice, who shows Ned, Marcy, and Jack the ropes when they arrive to the lake. Alice obviously will be our screen queen kind of central kind of character, but we aren't aware of that at this point. We're also introduced to Bill, who seems to be something of a handyman, who's another one of these kids who's there. Cut to another scene, and Ned, he's the clown character, isn't he, essentially in this, and he fires an arrow into a test target that Brenda has set up. So Brenda's another girl on the kid of the kids that's there, and it narrowly misses her. And apparently, this is his attempt at being flirtatious.
Yeah.
Which is
yeah.
yeah. Nice.
No.
Nice job. Interestingly, the person that fired that arrow was Tom Savini,
Oh, all right.
the guy who is this SFX
makeup.
guru on this set, and we'll come to talk about him a
Yeah,
bit more,
I've got a lot
particularly
to
down the
say
track.
about him.
So then we come back to Annie. Okay, just to remind people, she's the backpacker we first see at the beginning, coming into the locals. She's got this ride from one of the one of the locals. She's now hitches another ride from an unseen driver. After they miss their turn off, Annie begins to panic and she's insisting on being dropped off. The driver, by the way, is we never see. It's done in their POV again. Annie starts to panic and she jumps out of the car that's moving along and she starts running through the woods and she's being followed by her assailant. She's then cornered and the attacker slits her throat, killing her. So this is another one of those ones, a bit like you mentioned about how Scream as well, and Psycho is a very good example of how when we first set this up, you're led to kind of almost believe that this Annie character is going to be the one to follow, and they kind of knock her off straight off the get-go.
Yeah, exactly.
A courageous move, really, to do that. I felt from the director and writer to kind of I guess lure the audience in and kill off what we believe is going to be the central character. And it gives a good testament of what's to come. I feel like you know from there on in, like none of the rules that you've seen before are going to count. Anything's going to go pretty much.
That's the thing. So yeah, I mean, this sort of seems to be writing the rules almost.
Yes.
But then they're also kind of breaking their own rules along the way.
Yeah.
It's very clever. They're making up their own specific genre almost.
Very much so. Very much so.
Yeah.
So like it's interesting, like because I think this is 1982. This film came out, I believe. So we would have already had John Carpenter's Halloween in 1978, which people say was the birth of the slasher film. The writer himself, who of Friday the 13th, a guy called Victor Miller, he basically went and watched Halloween in the movies and took a note down of all the rules that were being set in play, and that's basically what he took as a carbon copy of how you need to write a horror film. And then, as you said, he made up the rules along the way on top of that. So the foundations was essentially Halloween.
Yeah. And then basically built the horror house on top.
Yeah. And it was Victor Miller that invented the whole, all right, well, if you have sex, you die.
Yeah. Wow.
Kind of rule. Like, he basically took that from the fact, in Halloween with
exactly.
Michael.
That's exactly what happened.
Yeah, exactly. It was like, well, that's what's got to happen. If you have sex, you're going to die. So that's a big hint, by the way, of what's to come. Yeah. All right, so we've seen the first of our present day victims being killed. Meanwhile, the other counsellors goof off at the camp, unaware that they are being watched. There's a scene where Ned, the clown character, feigns being drowning in order to cop off with Brenda. Yeah, he's a classy guy. Alice then discovers a snake in the dorm, and then we have this kind of cue where everyone starts fumbling around in his or her attempts to get rid of the snake. The result is that Ned, the handyman kind of character, basically chops up the snake, and then Marcy, the character, kind of jokes around saying they could use it for dinner. There's a big hint here with I guess they're trying to, sow the seeds or get the audience starting to think who the killer is, and the fact that Ned's the one that chops up the snake, you're already kind of going, oh, who's he? He's that's a bit wielding the machete around.
They're throwing out there.
That's right. And the other thing to add is that the snake in question was a real snake, and it actually did get chopped up.
You can do that these days.
No. That's right. Okay, so We then cut to outside, and Ned's goofing around again. He's pretending to be a Native American Navajo indigenous, American. And a police officer arrives on a motorcycle with this macho attitude, looking for Ralph. Apparently, there was another writer involved other than Victor Miller, and one of the things that was added was this scene of this kind of police officer. And I know that Victor Miller, watching the documentaries, was saying how he was quite disgruntled about this police officer character coming into the camp, because part of his rule or structure that Victor Miller had set up was that he wanted to have a location where no adults could infiltrate. And that's why they are in danger. It's not he wanted to have this isolated area, and he felt this, by bringing this police character in, it broke that wall down.
Yeah.
Which I kind of get,
Yeah, totally. I mean, you look at Scream, that type of thing as well, where pretty much every adult was a child. Dewey was a child. Courtney Cox was, basically, essentially a vain child masquerading as an adult as well. When you're given that sort of bunch of kids together, you can kill them off quite easily, I guess.
yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Okay, so sorry, where are we up now? Oh yeah, so then we come back to Alice, our heroine, who opens the pantry door in one of the dorms, and she discovers creepy nutjob Ralph lurking inside, and once more he prophesies their doom. We also hear at this point, which is probably a key thing, is that the electricity is not at its best on the camp, and they have this emergency generator on hand. And then we get a bit outside later on where Ned, the goofy clown character, is watching Marcy and Jack being quite flirty with each other. And there's a sense almost of envy on Ned's behalf because he's not getting any action himself. At which point he notices that there's some kind of movement in one of the huts. So he goes off to investigate it and goes inside. Then we come back to the Marcy and Jack characters. Just a reminder, Jack's the Kevin Bacon character. It's not character, actor, playing Jack. And Jack senses like this storm approaching, and he and Marcy then go to seek shelter in one of the huts, where naturally they get it on. Uh-oh. And just a reminder about that rule about if you have sex...
You're going to get bacon.
That's it, you're going to get bacon.
Bacon.
I want some bacon. Anyway, meanwhile, Alice and Bill and Brenda start playing a game of Strip Monopoly in one of the other dorm rooms.
As they do, as pubescent teenagers do.
Yeah, that's right. But whilst then we come back to Jack and Marcy again, and as they're getting it on, it is revealed as the camera pans up to the top bunk that Ned is lying above them, dead, with his throat slit. So, yep, another one bites the dust. After our couple have done their deed, so to speak, Marcy then goes to the bathroom, leaving Jack behind. Jack kicks back in bed, lights a cigarette, when a drop of blood lands on his head. Just as he becomes inquisitive, a hand grabs him from under the bed and a spear is thrust through his throat.
I must say, this is one of my favourite horror deaths of all time.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
Actually, I used to, when I was a kid, I used to have a bed that hung, so you could walk underneath the bed, and it always made me paranoid that somebody one day would stick a spear through the bottom of the bed, and that would so I absolutely scared the piss out of me when I was a kid. So,
it's a great scene, and it still now is probably the most iconic death, not just in this film, but as you say, in horror movie history. And a part of that is because of the Kevin Bacon's how he's become a much significant actor in Hollywood scenes. But that aside, it's still an amazing kind of special effects. And
the makeup is amazing. Just the the way that spear just comes straight through, and the just the way that the skin and the blood dark red blood comes out. It's brutal.
It was a one-shot deal too. Like
really?
They could only do it in one shot because of the way that the spear had to come through the prosthetic.
Right.
And interestingly enough, so you've got Tom Savini and his assistant lying under the bed in order to do that, and obviously the way and Kevin Bacon's head is prop there. The torso itself is fake, and Tom Savini's underneath, and he shoves the spear through, but something happened where the valve got broken, and apparently his the blood where the blood's meant to come up didn't work, so his assistant basically blew into the pipe to push the blood up, and that's why you get this splurt that comes up, which was purely accidental. It wasn't meant to go that way. Yeah, exactly. And basically they kind of come out and they're absolutely covered in this fake blood because it had gone everywhere underneath them. It sounded like they had a real laugh, I must admit. Just not just the SFX guys, but the actors as well. It sounded like they were all kind of in really good spirits, and I think that's part of the reason why the end product is so good too.
Yeah, they're fully you could see there was masters of their craft, and they were having a lot of fun doing this. So, I mean, Savini alone has become an icon in makeup and stuff, and this is just one of his best, I think.
Yeah.
Apart from the Ramiro stuff,
that's right.
And he always remembers it. I saw him a few years ago at the Vanguard.
Oh yeah.
He did a night with Tom Savini. And he was just absolutely just going off about Friday the 13th being one of his favourite films of all time. Yeah. And just the Jason makeup and the deaths alone, they're just so memorable. I think they're the most real looking deaths I ever saw as a kid watching a horror film. So I mean, there's one later with an axe that just comes down, and it's just I just keep rewinding it over and over again, and the Bacon one going, how did they do that? It's amazing.
I know. He's a legend. He's an absolute legend. And as I said, we'll talk about him in more detail down the track. But and what interestingly, just about that particular death as well, it did strike with the fact that one of people's natural fears is people hiding under the bed. It's something that's been played over and over and over again. And this kind of really ticks that box, as you say, as one of those scares. When you're a teen watching that movie, I dare anyone to try and go to bed that night and not look under their bed before they go to sleep. So we've had yet another death scene occur, and now we turn our attention back to the bathroom where Marcy has gone. She hears noises and presumes that it's Ned. She goes to investigate the showers, but there's no one there. We see this silhouette of an axe behind her. So this is coming up to the death scene you were alluding to a moment ago. When she turns to discover her assailant, she screams, and the axe comes bearing down on her and is thrust deep into her skull. Another death.
No one.
What's interesting about that, talking about the effect of that, when Tom Savini went to when they first sat down with the scripts and they got this guy Tom, he'd already done his work for Dawn of the Dead with Romero at the time, which is why they were like, we need somebody who is at top of his game, and they really wanted this guy Tom. And he basically turned up for the script reading and he made all these notes. And on this particular one, he said, I noticed that you've got an axe, being embedded into a head here. Do you want it to be a fake head with a real axe, or do you want it to be a real person with a fake axe? Which way around it's got to be. Obviously, we get the actor with the fake axe. Yeah. In this instance, but his attention to detail was second to none. Then we go back to the dorm where the kids are playing strip Monopoly. So just remember that's Bill, Brenda, and Alice. At the moment, the only survivors of the kids that are left. Brenda realizes though that she's left her cabin windows open. There's a huge storm kind of breaking down outside. And of course, she decides to call it a night and go off on her own to the dorm.
I'll be right back.
I'll be right back. So Brenda goes to the bathroom. So that same kind of scene that we've just witnessed, Marcy's death in, to wash up. And so naturally, you're already kind of on tenterhooks because we're at the scene of a death that's occurred. And she's being watched the whole time from behind the shower curtains. So we're kind of thinking that at this point, that's curtains for her. Hey.
Yeah.
But then we kind of then go back to Steve. So I don't know if you remember Steve, like Chris, what's his name? Steve Christie. So he's the guy that owns the lake, and he was the guy at the beginning who was uprooting the tree. And so he's gone off on his own, and he's at this point he's in one of those kind of American diners having a cup of Joe. And he's about to head back into the rain, into the camp. And so we're kind of following him as well at the same time. We go back to Brenda, and she's, in the bathroom washing up. And she's being watched, as I said, this whole time as well, as she's doing that. So then we go back to Steve again, so bear with me. And he's stuck in the mud in his car. But fortunately, he's rescued by a police officer who gives him a lift back to the camp, or offers to give him a lift back to the camp. We then go back to Brenda again, who's now retired in her cabin, when someone outside is watching her, or, done from the POV again. She settles down.
I love the POV stuff, but the use is a fair bit, but it's such an effective and creepy thought.
Oh, especially that one as well, because it's looking through the window as well.
Yeah.
So it's really this voyeuristic thing, isn't it? And you're a fan of that voyeuristic kind of thing as well, because one of your favourite movies is Peeping Tom, isn't it, buddy?
Yeah.
It's that whole kind of that when you're watching somebody you shouldn't be watching, and as a viewer you are equally playing a party to that.
Exactly.
It's a great technique.
And Raimi is in Evil Dead to a comic. Takes it to a comic level as well.
Yeah.
So, I think it's Evil Dead 2 where the POV chases and then loses Ash at one stage and gets lost down a hallway and turns around, comes back. So
yeah, that's right. It's great. And because with Evil Dead, it does the POV of these spirits, doesn't it, and stuff through the woods.
Yeah, because you've never seen the spirits.
No.
In Evil Dead, and it's all done through the POV, and that's what makes it even more unsettling. But
it's a big thing, isn't it? Like with part of what makes horror so good is the unknown, and not being able to see the killer or the assailant or whatever it is that's hunting these people down.
Yeah,
it really strikes that, because you don't know who or what this thing is, and that's what really sells this film.
What makes sports work, like just because you never saw the shark till the end.
And that was purely accidental though too.
Yeah, but it certainly worked.
It certainly worked.
They obviously made a deliberate choice to make that. Decision to take it down that route, but it makes it even more scarier when you can't see the monster basically.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. So we're seeing it from as we said, the POV, and the person is watching through the window at Brenda as she's getting into bed, she's settling down to read, and then she hears this kind of faint cry of help coming from outside. So what does she do? She goes to investigate. She's led outside, and then she ends up down at the archery range, and suddenly all the lights go on. So it's like this blinding light, and she starts backing away, and then we hear this terrifying scream, and then we cut back to Alice and Bill, who hear said scream, and Alice is telling Bill that she saw the lights go on at the archery range, and what do? They go to investigate. Common theme, and
that's the thing. We know it's scary and shit's happening.
Yeah.
If you're a kid and you're on a camp, helping set up a camp before the kids got there, you'd be like, oh, no, this is fine, nothing happening. No one knows what's going on. So you're all innocent. The world's a lovely place when you're a child.
That's right.
But yeah.
Exactly right. So they go down. They go to investigate. But first they go to Brenda's cabin, and that's when they find like this bloody axe in her bed. And then to coin Alice's quote, or to quote Alice, she's like, "What's going on?" And things are starting to kind of piece together that things aren't necessarily hunky dory, shall we say? So they go in search of everyone because obviously at this point they're on their own and they think, well, we need to find out where everyone's gone. And they discover that all the phone lines are down and the car won't start. So they know they're in some kind of a predicament at this stage. We go back to the police officer who's giving Steve a ride, and he gets this call over, a dispatch call, and he kind of says he has to leave Steve to kind of make his own way back to the camp, so he has to drop him off. At which point we're starting to follow Steve, and Steve comes across his assailant, again done in the POV of the killer. But interestingly, at this point, Steve appears to know who the person is. You get the, "Oh, hi, what are you doing here?" And then, just as he's walking up to the person, he's duly killed by being stabbed in the stomach. So another one got down. So we're definitely down to like the last two. We've just got Alice and Bill left. They go to the generator because the generator goes down. Bill goes to check it out, and Alice, as she does, falls asleep on the couch. That's nothing to worry about. She wakes up a little time later and she realizes that she's alone, and Bill hasn't come back yet. So she starts feeling a bit anxious about where he is. So goes to find him. She goes down to the generator room and discovers his poncho on the floor, and then discovers Bill's body pinned to the door with arrows. So he's dead. So she's on her own. All the while we're going, who the hell's this killer? So Alice goes back to the cabin and she starts to barricade herself in, pulling everything across the door and stuff. And she kind of pushes herself up against the wall of the cabin and breathes this kind of sigh of yes, I'm okay. And just at that point, Brenda's lifeless body is thrown through the window. Alice then kind of panics, makes her way to the front door, and at which point she sees a car arrive and presumes that it's Steve coming back. She gets out of the cabin, and instead of finding Steve, she is greeted by Mrs. Voorhees, apparently an old friend of the Christies. And Alice starts telling Mrs. Voorhees that everyone's been killed. They go back into the cabin, at which point Mrs. Voorhees becomes visibly unstable and tells Alice about how her son, Jason, drowned in the lake due to the carer's neglect. She states that she couldn't possibly let them reopen the cabin before turning a knife on Alice. The killer is revealed. Alice makes a run for it and discovers Annie in the Jeep. Annie, the backpacker kid from the first killing. And then she also finds Steve hanging dead from some rafters. It's like the body's all coming out. Mrs. Voorhees then starts taking on some of Jason, her dead son's personality. With the whole kind of what does she say? She's like, "Get her, mummy, get her, mummy."
It's almost the reverse.
Kill her.
Psycho, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Actually, and that's something they spoke about in documentary. I believe the writer spoke about that. He basically took Psycho and then turned it on its head.
Yeah.
It's the mum that's the killer, not the son.
Yeah.
So Alice tries to find some bullets for a gun, but to no avail. And then Mrs. Voorhees finds her and starts to beat her with a pan, I believe. It's quite a big blow. Things like that start occurring. Somehow, though, Alice is able to stand her ground and get away. Alice makes her way back to the main cabin and locks herself in the pantry. Obviously, before too long, Mrs. Voorhees finds Alice and breaks into the pantry. So she's kind of cocooned herself in a no way out scenario.
Yeah.
But somehow again, manages to defend herself. This time she's armed only with a cake tin, in which she manages to knock Mrs. Voorhees to the ground. Alice then makes her way down to the lake, where she just sits down and has a bit of a rest. Again, Mrs. Voorhees finds her, and a big scuffle breaks out between the two. Alice fights her way free, grabs the machete that Mrs. Voorhees was brandishing, and Alice begins to swing blindly with the machete, at which point she decapitates Mrs. Voorhees.
Which is awesome.
And
what a great decapitation.
Oh, one of the best decapitations ever.
Yeah. Full swing around and then bang, lucky shot.
There, it's great, I love it.
Yeah.
And then, and you get this kind of stunned look on Alice after she's done it, like as she climbs into the boat and starts to paddle out into the middle of the lake.
As you do.
As you do. And then we get one of the moments, probably the biggest gem this movie offers is the finale, where Alice is like dawn breaks. She's lying in the boat still. We see a couple of police cars arrive. 2 officers step out and they're motioning towards her. The music starts playing up, and the audience are kind of get this feeling, this is it. This is where the credits are going to roll. She's rescued. And just as Alice stirs, she seems a bit disorientated. And just then, a bloody figure of a boy, Jason, launches out of the water and drags Alice under. It's a bit of a Carrie moment with the hand coming out of the grave.
Yeah, I was going to say that actually. The flowers, yeah.
That's right. Because Alice wakes up in hospital. So was it a whole dream? What just occurred? She's told that everybody's dead, from the camp. And Alice mentions the boy named Jason, but the police officer just says there was no boy. Yeah. And Alice declares, but he must still be there.
Yeah.
And we are then faced with the crossfade to the still lake as music ascends and close credits as we roll.
Set up for a sequel.
But was it? It wasn't initially, though. From Sean Cunningham and Victor Miller's point of view, that was the end. Obviously, what we know is that a sequel would follow.
And that would I think the sequel then set up the franchise.
Exactly.
With that ice hockey mask and the whole big guy of Jason Voorhees going.
That's right.
That's the thing. Jason Voorhees wasn't in this one.
No.
Essentially, as the killer the whole time.
No.
Which is, it's the first quiz on screen.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so...
Well, but what's interesting, we will get on to talk about that when we go into talking about the other franchise, movies that were made for the franchise. But what's interesting, and what was puzzling me is it's like Jason's dead, right? And obviously we know because we've watched the other movies what they do around that. But when you hear of a sequel, and even Sean Cunningham was saying, how can you do a sequel? Because they were talking about, well, get the kid, the boy.
Yeah.
And he's like, but he's dead.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
He's not working in a supernatural world. He's working in a real world.
That's right.
Yeah. So that's the thing about the slasher horror films is they weren't based in a supernatural world. It was actually that was what made it scary, was that you're dealing with real mania.
Yeah, that's right.
And real psychological illness.
That's it.
They essentially they broke it even more by doing the sequels, by bringing this thing back to life, basically. You know?
Yeah.
But yeah, obviously that last sequence was a dream of her. She was traumatized, and reliving that one little moment, basically. Well, imagining moments with Jason Voorhees just attacking people, not her.
Yeah.
And the mother how could a mother kill, 10 kids or whatever, however many kids that she killed. So it's interesting.
It's interesting too, isn't it? If we talk about the killer at the moment, and we'll get to talk about the lady who played Mrs. Voorhees, Betsy Palmer. With the character itself, we talked about how she's the American kind of sweet as pie kind of, mother figure. But a lot of people who've watched this movie and fans of the movie and horror films find they kind of find a connection with her because her killing, her motive is born out of a genuine protection.
Yeah.
That this sort of neglect of, because her kid died.
Yeah.
Because of the neglect of the kids, so she's doing it to stop it from happening again. So there is this kind of like logical reason why someone would go to those kind of lengths. And yeah, she's mad as batshit.
Yeah.
You know.
I don't know whether you can actually find logic out of that, though. That's the thing.
You reckon?
Yeah, I don't. I think killing a whole bunch of innocent people. I think she's trying to prove a point, or she's just broken.
No, she would have been unhinged.
And it almost seems like a misspent revenge, almost.
Yeah.
No, she's trying to take revenge out on an unnamed killer, basically.
Yeah.
She sticks blame on someone, and she's now but she hasn't fixed it on a specific person. She's fixed it on a whole, basically. So the teenage campers, that's who she wants to get rid of.
Yeah.
But I don't think she's doing it to stop people reopening the camp. I think she's doing it because she wants to deflect some blame onto someone.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right. Yeah, it's that, you know, it's a very typical response for people that are dealing with grief, that you want to blame someone.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and when you have someone who's unhinged like she is, it's only gonna go wrong. So let's talk about Betsy Palmer. So she's this girl next door type. She would be this regular panelist on a game show that was called I've Got a Secret, which a lot of Americans would have known her for at the time. Interestingly, the role was initially given to Estelle Parsons, who was JR's mum in Dallas.
Oh.
And she would become, but she was unavailable for the production when the schedule got moved, and so she was unavailable. So then Betsy Palmer was called upon, and Betsy Palmer went on record, and she said it ever since. You know, she did it because it would be a bit of money, and she thought nobody is ever going to see this. How wrong she was. And she got a lot of
her most famous role for
that's
people.
right. But she got a lot of hate mail. Like she actually got somebody one of the critics at the time basically slandered her for assigning herself to this kind of a role in this kind of a movie, and you know, going against type. And they not only did that, but they put down her contact address and demanded people write hate mail to her in response to what she did. But you know what?
Nominated for a Razzie.
Huh?
I'm just looking up. She was nominated for a Razzie Award.
For this?
Yeah.
Seriously?
The film got the director and the film got nominated too.
Wow, that's insane. Actually, I know the critics really panned
it. No, it won.
Did it? Serious?
I think Sean Cunningham. Oh no, it was still a nominee.
Okay.
But yeah, it was a nominee for Razzie for Worst Picture.
That's insane.
That's freaking insane.
That's
just bizarre. Whoever organises the Razzies, it must have to look back and go, "Well, that was a bit stupid, wasn't it?" I mean, it's no. What was last year's one? It wasn't the Hunger Games. It was one of these awful ones. Anyway.
There's been some really bad ones. Look, deserve that. That Mordecai, was it, with Johnny Depp?
Oh, that was it. Yeah,
that was it.
I haven't seen that.
No, I haven't either. But the interesting thing with the as I was saying, with this critic who basically put out her Betsy Palmer's actual contact details, is that Betsy didn't get a single letter. So it didn't work. All right, let's look at. Quickly, what did you think of her performance, Betsy Palmer? Like we were just saying, she got the Razzie, but
believable, very believable. So,
I thought that too.
You know, she looks like nice apple pie lady. You never really think that she's the killer, and it just turns as soon as she starts rabbiting on in Jason voice. You just go and talking about him getting like dying while the councils are doing stuff. You just go, this is kind of twisted here.
It's a great.
She's one of the greatest horror villains of all time.
Absolutely, completely agree with that. And I really love that scene too, where she goes from, you know, as you said, the humble kind of apple pie, sweet and innocent mum figure, and this kind of slowly descends as she tells her story, and quickly, in the space of 2 minutes, it's quite evident that she's the killer and is a incredibly unhinged. All right, let's look at our heroine, played Alice, who's played by Adrienne King. You know, she would actually reprise the role of Alice in Friday the 13th Part 2. She became, before this movie, she actually played an uncredited dancer in the movie Saturday Night Fever. But she would disappear from the scene until about 2010 for a film called Psychic Experiment, and she's been like in a handful of movies since then. But but what's interesting is the story that comes out about her. I don't know if you're aware of her background, Miles, but she actually at the time after the movie came out was so huge. She actually had she had somebody who was obsessed with her and became a stalker.
Right.
At a time when stalkers weren't heard of. The person in question actually befriended her to get into her inner circle. So he became one of her friends. All of which led to this kind of harrowing experience for her, and nobody would believe her when she, when this was unfolding, and eventually the said person was apprehended, and arrested for his actions. But it was a really and it was really kind of like a harrowing experience for her, and it took her a long time to get through it. And she does say part of what helped her was the actual. Sane fans who who would reach out to her, but all this was kind of going on, and then when Friday the 13th Part 2 comes about, there was a bit of and we'll probably talk about this in the next podcast, but there was a bit of animosity around her coming on board because the crew kind of were led to believe that that she was asking for more money, and she didn't. From her point of view, she'd had this ordeal and she was just kind of signing up to do it. So she wasn't actually kind of asking for more money. Sounds like there might have been a question mark around the agent that was dealing with it at the time, her agent. So she got to set and basically and didn't know the script, and then without we're kind of giving the game away a bit here, but her role isn't a big role. Let's put it that way in the sequel.
It's a good role. Like I think the first 10 minutes are the strongest of a lot of of the whole franchise, pretty much. I loved it. It was the first 10 minutes of the sequel inspired me to write a feature film.
Wow.
Based on post-traumatic stress after surviving an attack. I think you read it was the werewolf one.
Yeah.
And that actually was the instigator. That started, one of the instigators that started that was seeing her in the first 10 minutes of the sequel having survived this monster attack or this psychotic attack and having to deal and go back to real life basically. And so it's quite interesting. Well, and we'll talk about that one in our next podcast. But they're definitely interesting. But it makes you wonder what she would have. Would she have become somebody? Would have her acting career have taken a different path if she hadn't have had this personal harrowing experience? Well, I noticed she sounded as additional voices. So maybe I think she was doing ADR work for the rest of the line. So, she's quite happy doing that. Otherwise, she might have been a big star one day. But
no, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? It does make you wonder.
Yeah.
So we're going to go through a couple of the other characters fairly quickly. We have Janine Taylor, who plays Marcy. Mainly just minimal screen credits, huge theatre presence. Now, when they cast the film, all these kids were like unknown, big theatre presence kind of people that were trying to break the scene into the at the time. So it was very cleverly cast. There's like some strong performers in there. So a lot of these people haven't had much screen credits, but were known on the theatre circuits and have continued to. Yeah. Likewise, Robbie Morgan, who plays Annie, very similar thing, big in the theatre scene, minimal screen credits. Then we come to
that's essentially what I'm doing for my feature. Actually, it's the other sideline.
Yeah,
because most of my people, the actors, are all pretty much unknown. They're big in theatre. They've done very little screen stuff, so it's definitely, and that's what I learned from, I think Wes Craven as well. He used a lot of unknown theatre people.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's definitely the best way to do a horror film because everybody's disposable. You're not following a lead actor, so...
Yeah, because as soon as you know that there's a name attached to it, you kind of know that, they're going to survive to the end, Unless you're Samuel Jackson in Deep Blue Sea. Then,
That's great.
So, love that scene. Speaking of which, the big name that came out of this was Kevin Bacon, who plays Jack.
Yeah.
He notably starred in, prior to this movie, he starred in Animal House. He would follow that role he would follow that film with a role in Diner, huge ensemble cast in that one. And then but he was only like 2 heel clicks away from Footloose, which is where everything opened up for him. His next notable role wouldn't come probably until the 90s. He was prominent in the scenes, and that would be with Tremors, which also spawned its own franchise. And he was also in Flatliners as well, which
great film.
Great film.
Do you think he's just got a soft spot for the horror?
I think he does.
I mean, maybe that's why he did The Following as well. It was a rubbish TV series, but it had like a good. The sentiment was there, but
there's a lot. There's a lot.
Done some pretty good horror films.
Yeah. I've got it in my list, but Stir of Echoes was a great film. I don't know if you've ever seen that. Have you seen that?
Yeah, Richard Matheson script. Brilliant. So good.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah.
Really good.
That cinema scene alone is just one of the best scenes of any kind of horror film.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a really good film. Really recommend. If no one's seen it, I recommend people watch it. Just to go through some of the handle of...
Get hypnotized.
Sorry?
I said try not to get hypnotized.
Yeah, that's right. So just going through a couple of just to name some of his other movies, just to give you an idea of the kind of strength that he's gone on to. He was in JFK, A Few Good Men, Murder in the First, Apollo 13, Sleepers, Wild Things, Hollow Man, Mystic River, The Woodsman, Frost Nixon, X-Men First Class, and as you mentioned, TV series The Following of more recent times. And you can tell in this movie though too, like he's got presence on screen. He's and then this isn't just us. I don't know whether it's a benefit of hindsight, but when you do watch it, he does still stand out. There's something about his presence on screen.
I think when I'd seen it, he was already. I think Footloose was out.
Yeah.
Enough. So everybody was like, "Oh, it's the guy from Footloose, Kevin Bacon." And you're like, "Oh, okay." And so you knew he was like a big star already. Like this was one of his first films. So.
That's right. So joining the cast also is Harry Crosby. As I mentioned, he plays Bill, and he's the son of Bing Crosby. Most of the time on set, like he was musical too, and most of the time on set he was walking around with a guitar and just kind of playing music. And I think from memory from the documentary, he followed Tom Savini around. He was quite fascinated with the stuff behind the scenes. Also, we had Laurie Bartram, who played Brenda. Again, like minimal screen credits, and she actually passed away quite young too from cancer, I believe. And then we have Ned, the goofy character Ned, who's played by Mark Nelson. He's probably somewhat more proactive than his fellow on-screen victims. But mainly he's been like in the odd episode on TV and things like that. We have Peter Brower, who plays Steve Christie. He also, interestingly, I noticed in his credits, he played the auctioneer in the Arthur remake. So that's the one with Russell Brand.
Like, that's something to be proud of.
I know, random.
He's still alive?
Yeah, apparently so. Then the truck driver character, the guy that gives Annie a lift. He's a guy called Rex Everhart. I put him down as a mention because he apparently played a desk sergeant in 1978's Superman, and he was also played a role in The Elephant Man, David Lynch's film.
Oh yeah, he did. I remember him. Yeah.
Then we also have Ron, and I want to pronounce his name, Ron Milkey, who's the Officer Dorf character. So he's the guy, the cop character on the motorbike. He had a minor role in the Return to Salem's Lot. Mention that one because we're hoping to have discussions around Tobe Hooper's films down the track, of which the original Salem's Lot was his film. Then we get Crazy Ralph, played by Walt Gorney. He also would reprise his role as the character Ralph in the sequel, Friday the 13th Part 2. And interestingly, he had an uncredited role as the narrator in Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood. He also cropped up in Trading Places. And his character, Crazy Ralph, was originally called Ralphie Rat Boy because he carried rats around with him. Somewhere along the way that got lost. But I love his character. It's just very typical of the nutjob, kind of town nutjob. Very cool. And the other notable mention from the acting point of view was Ari Lehman, who played Jason, the boy at the end. He'd been picked up because he worked with Cunningham in another film called Manny's Orphans. He'd then go on to starring like Cheerleader Camp to the Death, Leaf Blower Massacre 2. And he was even in a short film called Crystal Lake as well.
Oh, right.
But he goes down as playing the first ever Jason in film history. And he's also
looks like he's been touring the con circuit.
Yeah, I was about to say that he's very prominent in the touring circuit, which is cool.
He's grasping hold of those 15 minutes.
That's it. Okay, and the last person I'm going to mention, because he does technically have a screen credit, is Tom Savini. But he's because he plays the knife killer.
Yeah.
But he's known in this because he deals with the effects. We've spoken about him already. Interestingly, there was a great quote in the documentary where he said, "I would sit in the auditorium as the movie's playing out. He'd pick someone out in the crowd and just watch the evolution of their heart attack." Love it. As I said earlier on in our discussions, he was hired because of his visual effects on Dawn of the Dead, because they were so realistic. And you mentioned that, said you probably one of the most realistic kind of special effects you've seen in horror films. And Tom actually has said that he put this down to his experience as being a combat officer in Vietnam. He really wanted that realism of what he saw, and that's basically what he carried out in his effects, He's the person, as I mentioned, who fired that close shot with the arrow past Brenda. When quizzed about it, because it is damn close to her, his response was, "We were just being deadly accurate." He'd go on to, be behind Friday the 13th, the final chapter, as uncredited Jason in the Hitchhiker murder scene, for the effects for that. On screen, he was been in Machete Kills, Django Unchained, Planet Terror, From Dusk Till Dawn, playing Sex Machine. He was in Lost Boys: The Tribe.
Oh God, really?
He was in the It was in the Dawn of the Dead, the original and remake.
The remake's great fun.
He handled the FX for that.
Yeah.
And he was also in the Dead movies. You've mentioned he was in the worked with Romero closely, but just to be specific, he was also behind, worked with Land of the Dead and Diary of the Dead. He also did.
Did he hand over the reins for that? He did it to Nicotero. Is that
I think
right?
so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I remember the speech that he was doing. He was like, Nicotero's like, he's like me when I was his age, and it was just before he was about to appear on Django.
Yes.
When I saw him, and he was talking about working with Tarantino again, because Tarantino is such a massive Savini fan.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
Hence why he crops up a lot. Yeah.
He actually came. He spent Savini spent some time in Australia actually.
Oh, really?
His girlfriend was an Australian girl who was a lot younger than him. She was a makeup student that he was sort of mentoring. He mentored a whole bunch of these Aussie makeup artists. And they ended up producing, he worked on a film, I think it was called, I say Red Mist, but it might be something else. But yeah, there was a horror film done in Australia that he ended up mentoring the effects department on. So I'll find out what film it is. I'll give you a shout.
Yeah, do. Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure it's Red Mist though. But it was
I think that rings a bell. I think I seem to remember reading that in his credits. So I think
you're right. Yeah. But yeah, it was super interesting.
Yeah, cool.
Good guy. Nice guy.
I'd love to
stayed around for ages after his audience with, and just talked to everybody as well. So really friendly guy.
I'd have loved to have gone to that. That sounds really cool. I'm a huge fan of his. Just to round out some of the stuff he did as well. Like he worked on Children of the Living Dead. He did the FX for Creepshow 1 and 2. Also did the effects for Maniac and Martin. He's also directed a few features too, including Night of the Living Dead, which obviously spawned its own franchise.
That's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Red Ink, that's what it's called.
What was it called?
Red Ink.
Like
Red Ink Incorporated. It's got Bad Boy Bubby Dude in it as well. Yeah.
Cool.
Oh, cool. And there's a guy in it that's actually looking to be in my film.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, he's one of the starring roles in it, so I might have to definitely hit up.
Definitely do that, man. That's a massive nod.
Yeah.
All right, so let's look at the director. We mentioned him already, Sean Cunningham. He was the producer behind Last House on the Left. He did like a couple of softcore porn movies and a couple of like kids family movies that just didn't get any eyeballs. Huh?
Did he do Spring Break? Was that the one?
Yeah, I think that was him. Yeah.
Johnny Depp.
Yeah.
The one that Johnny Depp tried to ban. Many others. Mordecai is probably up there as well.
Oh yeah, far out. Yeah, that's it. But then, like, he was like looking at that point, like he had like failure after failure basically, and he basically just said like if he had a movie called Friday the 13th, he could sell it, and that was the emphasis, of the genesis, I should say, of where it began. He basically set up and made a movie poster, which was that famous Friday the 13th font crashing through some windows, and with the tag saying the scariest movie ever, or something along those lines, and basically was like going out pitching it, saying this is what it's going to be, and they made a movie out of it. And he's since then, like, he's obviously got the rights behind Friday the 13th. He jokes about how when he dies, his kids will probably be stuck making the movie still as it's going, on and on.
He's done some alright films since then. Have you seen The New Kids?
No.
It's really good. It's actually written by Jake Gyllenhaal's dad.
Really?
Stephen Gyllenhaal, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And yeah, it's got what is it? Lori Loughlin, who was in Full House. It's got James Spader in it. It's just these new kids coming to town, and these bullies start picking on them, played by Spader.
Yeah.
And it turned into this sort of like bloodthirsty revenge sort of survival type thing.
Blimey.
It's alright. I saw it years ago, but I remember liking it at the time. But it was probably shit. But
Yeah, well, it's up for debate now. You put yourself down there saying it was good, so
Yeah,
wait
no,
for
I
the
remember
avalanche
liking
of
it though.
feedback. What are you thinking?
Yeah, yeah. We've got 6 out of 10 in on IMDb, but
Mm,
you know,
yeah,
I've seen films get higher than that, and they'll be
yeah,
absolute crap. So,
absolutely.
yeah.
That's it. That's
Mm.
it. All right. So then we've got I've mentioned him already. The writer Victor Miller. You know, he actually worked with Sean before with Mandy's Orphans and A Stranger Is Watching, which was
Mm-hmm.
actually a Carpenter film. But interestingly, before he set out writing Friday the 13th, he basically said he's not a horror fan. He winced at any kind of ounce of gore when he was on screen. But he knew that when he got given this task, he wanted to start with a prior evil, and have something occur a long time ago that was really bad, and then you put the kids in a situation where adults cannot help. And then also, as I said before, if you have sex, you'd be killed. That was it. That's basically what he'd come up with. And he came up with the idea of being on a lake, stranded, or a camp, I should say, by the lake, stranded. And that was it. That was the history after that is set in stone. It's amazing, really. Yeah, and he's another guy that often goes to these Comic-Con kind of events and stuff as well. He's still quite active on that side of things.
He's probably just rolling in his royalty checks.
That's it.
Yeah.
Well, as I mentioned, there was an uncredited writer on this who threw in a couple of extra bits and pieces too. And I've just mentioned his name is Ron Kurz, and he's cropped up on occasion talking about the movie and stuff as well.
Mm. Let's
move on to the last kind of person that's credited that we should make note of, and that's the music supplied by Harry Manfredini. He before we talk about the particular soundtrack on this, he did the music also for House 4, Spring Break, Zombie Island Massacre, and Here Come the Tigers.
Yeah.
But this is probably his most famous signature, and it's that whole.
It really is.
Thousands of people have imitated it since, as you said, the whole. But basically, I don't know if you know how he came up with with that sound or how it came about, right? So the line by Mrs. Voorhees is spoken, and it's this close-up shot of her mouth as she's imitating her son Jason, where she says, "Kill her mummy," and he just liked that shot and that word play was done over. And he was just stood in front of the mic. He had like one of these kind of, I'm not going to quote the right kind of technology, but it was like a reverb thing going on. And he basically just went up to the mic and just went, and it echoed and did this. And it's the start of Kill Her Mummy. So the ki bit is the kill, and the mu is the mummy bit. And so basically what you're hearing is kick, and ma. And then since then, it's like, and it's, as I say, it's one of the most iconic sounds in, that the theme from Psycho and probably the Halloween theme is probably the most recognisable themes in horror.
Well, I wanted to try and rip it off of my film actually, because I'm going to try and merge it with Ultravox's Vienna and have it do like a mash of it, because that song features throughout my film, but I want to have the drums of Vienna and that sound going throughout the film as well. So
nice.
It's going to be a mash because it sounds so similar as well. So
yeah, cool.
Yeah,
that sounds good, man.
See whether it works.
Yeah, we'll play with
it. Yeah, that's why I'm like Friday the 13th is one of my favourite films of all time.
Yeah.
See how?
Well, let's talk about why that is. Like there's a lot of shock factors that go on in this. There's a lot of deaths that occur. We have the counsellor's death at the beginning, then Annie's death, Ned's death, Jack's death, which was a huge moment on the film. Get Marcy, Steve, Brenda, Bill, and then we get the reveal at the end of who the killer is. Had there at this point been such a plethora of kills in a slasher film, to this point, or
I think, well, obviously Halloween, yes.
Yeah.
And Halloween 2 come out by that stage. That was even more brutal.
yeah,
But you know what? I think for me personally, it because I personally haven't seen any of this done before.
yeah.
Every horror film I'd ever seen before that was, 1940s RKO stuff or Universal Monsters or Hammer Horror stuff, and it was just like, so I'd never seen killing done so realistically until the birth of video stores and VHS. So going down to get it on VHS for the first time, sitting there watching it, going, how can this be on film? How can they do this? This is just amazing. and the bloodthirsty slasher horror fan was born basically. So, but and that's it. It was a seminal film for me personally.
Yes.
And I think it was for a lot of people of my age, especially who grew up on TV until the early 80s when VHSs and video recorders came out. And we had access to all these R-rated material that we had never seen before. So, it was eye-opening.
Oh, yeah.
Everything was so heavily censored before that.
No.
Every time you saw something on TV, it was just so bloody censored.
Yeah.
And just having access to any kind of anything above a PG was brilliant.
I think that's why I think critics were so taken aback by it when it came out, because it was so bloody, it was so gory. Nothing had been this. It was a whole new invention of a film genre right there, and people had never seen or witnessed anything like this. So it became an amazing kind of moment in film history when this came out, and it set the benchmark.
I mean, most of these films obviously went straight to like the drive-ins and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But was this one of the first ones to actually go to like a cinema release, or do we have the video market to thank for its success?
Yeah. That's right. I'm actually I'm gonna use this point to kind of throw in some notes here, because I want to say that. Actually, I'll say it and then I'll just see if the notes are there to back me up on it. But I'm pretty sure it was said that they got backing from the film producers to release this as a nationwide film, which is the first time something as low budget as this had occurred in that instance. And that was part of one of the reasons why it became so big. The movie itself, it was made for something like $500,000. And if you look at it, it was shot over 3 to 4 weeks. It was in wet and cold conditions, and because it was in the middle of autumn, I believe, because they couldn't. It was shot on location and on this actual camp, but they couldn't do it over the summer because it's being used. So they're kind of having to do it outside of that. And as I said, Cunningham, when he basically just took an ad out in the paper describing the movie as the scariest movie ever made to drum up interest. And at the stage, there was no idea. There was no script at all or concept. It was just purely the name and that it was going to be the scariest movie ever. One interesting thing I found is that Jason was originally going to be called Josh in the movie too. But the audiences, as I said, went crazy for it. I have written in here, and it's partly in support because of the support of the film company that gave the film a nationwide release. The critics universally hated it, and as I said, one person put Betsy Palmer's contact details out on their review. But as we've discussed as well, the Jason scare at the end was intended to be what it was, a device to scare at the end. It wasn't meant to be the beginning of a premise of a sequel. But the success of the movie would actually lead on to the sequel, and Cunningham would venture to say that notion of doing a sequel was the worst idea ever at the time. But he holds his hands up and said he was wrong with that assumption. That's it. And the goal was to always build up when they were making the film, was to always build up the suspense. To place more emphasis on on this than the gore itself. Even though the gore is quite realistic, the goal was to just keep building that suspense up and just keep kind of slowly bringing it more and more centralized. And it does that, and I think that's partly why it's such a great movie, because you really feel that tension surrounding these kids. And throw Tom Savini into the mix, and you've just got a recipe of one. That was one of the best ever concocted. So, like, what's your overall view there? I mean, you've already said that it's one of your favourite films of all time. I put here down. Does it feel dated? And maybe partly, but it still stands high. I think as I said, it set the benchmark for slasher horror films that would undertake years to follow, and it's still happening now. It was the movie that established a lot of rules, and in some cases broke down what was common conceptions at the time for moviegoers. It was definitely groundbreaking, and it was one that serves well for repeat viewing, I think, for any fan of the horror genre. What would you? Is there anything you'd like to add to that, buddy? Or
yeah, I mean, for me, it's a film that pretty much encapsulates the 1980s.
Yes,
and it was, it created a slasher genre that I don't think they've ever really matched the ability of the 1980s to produce slasher horror films. I mean, hence why my films that I'm making is a slasher horror film set in the 1980s.
Yeah.
Well, but so it's actually it reflects the whole decade of such great films and great genres that came out from the VHS and the video market. So for me, it was. I think I had such fond recollections of watching this for the first time. So it just kind of puts me back to being a child again, watching this scary bloody movie basically. I don't think if it's dated, it's dated in a nostalgic sort of way.
I completely agree with that. Yeah. I mean, like I say, I do emphasise that I still think it stands strong because of so many elements that are in here that are so right, that make it such a great recipe for an awesome horror film. It's interesting you mentioned how this one was a turning point for you as a fan of film and an introduction, I guess, into the horror scene. I think for me it was. I am no disrespect, just a couple of years younger than you, and I think that goes to say that the film that did that for me was A Nightmare on Elm Street, which was only 2 years after this.
Yeah.
But that to me is the same kind of thing. I remember watching that, scared out of my pants, and going around kind of playing games in some kind of junkyard, kind of with all these cars, pretending Freddy's out chasing after me, and scaring myself fucking stupid in the process because I'm playing this game, But yeah, I think it's interesting that there's. I guess everyone has that kind of, or particularly horror fans, have that one movie that resonated. With
I mean, I wonder about kids now. What's going to be that film that scares them, basically.
That's it.
And you got people like films like Friday the 13th, Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street. All of these amazing films that came out of the 80s that just I don't think they've ever matched. That Scream did a whole genre based on those films. Film series based on those films.
Well, that's it. And even Scream is a nod to that. It was a massive nod to that. And interestingly, by Wes Craven himself, who was one of the auteurs of the original horror movies of that time. It's interesting too, and just to add, like all those films that you've just mentioned have gone through remakes as well now. So it's
exactly.
Yeah, it is a good question about what people will look at as classic horror now. You've obviously got the Mumblegore movement that's happening as we speak, which are making, I guess, small waves. A lot of people look at it though as wanky, hip kind of chic. The hipster kind of movement, and it's not necessarily holds its own. It'll be interesting to see of that movement if any of them hold weight. You and I are both big
those
Ben
films
fans.
are heavily influenced by, films like Friday the 13th. So anything that comes, soundtracks alone have this sort of synth and 80s feel. So I guess Your Next, all that sort of stuff.
That's it. Yeah.
Definitely just a nod to these films.
Yeah.
But I don't think they're wanky. I think they know exactly what they are. Like House of the Devil and all the Ty Wests and Innkeepers. They could be the Innkeepers. Some great films.
That's it.
It's been watched.
Yeah.
They're sort of buried in Netflix at the moment. But
yes, that's it. I completely agree with you. I am a fan of those movies. I think they're all kind of adding a lot of weight to the horror genre and helping move it into a positive direction. So it is interesting, but it all started arguably with this one movie, Friday the 13th, as I said, and since then there's been numerous sequels that have followed, and we're hoping to talk about that in future podcasts. I think that probably rounds up our discussions, man. If you're cool,
it's been a heavy discussion.
It's been a heavy discussion. So that concludes our special horror film surgery, Friday the 13th edition. Keep your eyes peeled down the track, as I said, because Miles and I will dissect the franchise further with more podcast installments. Until then, we hope you enjoyed our discussion, and until next time, it's goodbye from Miles.
Goodbye.
And goodbye from me. Thanks again.
You've been listening to a Surgeons of Horror podcast, the Friday the 13th edition. Music supplied by Peter Nezik. For more discussions or podcasts, head over to surgeonsofhorror.com or head over to our Facebook and Twitter sites for the latest news and updates.